You dream of Rome. White marble glows under golden light. Columns reach the sky. Statues stand frozen, yet proud, watching, always watching. In your mind, it's eternal, elegant, civilized, powerful. But what if I told you you wouldn't last a single day? Not because you're weak, not because you don't belong, but because Rome was never built for softness. It was carved by blood, sweat, betrayal, and brutal survival. In this empire, glory came at a cost. And comfort, that was a myth, sold to poets and sculptors. You think you'd enjoy a Roman bath? Let's talk about shared sponges and sewage water. You admire gladiators? You'd cheer while a real man dies screaming under a lion's claw. You picture opulent feasts? Half the guests fear poison in the wine, and some won't live to see dessert. Tonight, I'll take you there, not to the postcard Rome, but to the real Rome, the one where power was survival, where silence could save your life, and where the street you walked today might become your grave by sundown. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, because this is not just history, it's a story of why you're lucky to be exactly where you are. In your imagination, Rome is flawless. Towering columns bathed in golden sunlight. Statues so detailed they seem alive. Streets paved with perfect stone. A world that feels organized, advanced, even divine. But dreams can lie. And this dream, this marble dream, was never meant for softness. Not for yours, not for anyone's. The first thing that strikes you in the real Rome is the smell. Not incense, not fresh olive oil, but human waste. It seeps from narrow alleyways, dumped from windows, carried by the sun. You thought the eternal city would smell like time itself. Instead, it smells like survival. The streets are crowded, not just with people, but with noise. Children running barefoot, merchants shouting over one another, chickens, goats, and dogs all scrambling for scraps. You imagine quiet strolls in togas, but no one strolls. Everyone rushes, fights, pushes. It's not elegance, it's chaos wrapped in stone. You look up. Yes, the temples are magnificent, but the stones are chipped. The gods carved into the facades are weathered. Their eyes have seen too much. And you, visitor from the future, have seen too little. You think you're ready for Rome, but Rome isn't ready for you. You walk on roads older than your entire civilization, but they're uneven, cracked. Your sandals catch, your toes hurt. Rome doesn't stop to wait. Rome moves, and you try to keep up, but you can't. And then comes the dust. Dry, chalky, endless. It covers your clothes, your skin, your lungs. It turns your dream of white marble into something gray and choking. You blink, and it's still there, clinging to your lashes. And suddenly, that dream doesn't feel so beautiful anymore. You take shelter under a portico, hoping for relief. But even in the shade, the city breathes heat. You feel it rising from the stones beneath your feet, stones worn smooth by thousands of years of footsteps. And it hits you. These stones have seen everything. the rise of emperors, the death of children, the dreams of lovers whispered in the dark. These stones remember, but they do not speak. Rome is loud, but its past is silent. And you realize silence in Rome is not absence, it is memory. You move again, passing fountains where women fill clay jars with water and gossip through clenched teeth. You see a man sweeping filth from a shop entrance with the same motion he's done every day for 30 years. You hear the clink of coins and the clash of metal. Not soldiers, merchants. Deals, arguments, trades. This city runs not on dreams, but on survival. And everyone here is surviving in their own way. You step around a beggar. Her hands are outstretched, her eyes closed. Is she blind, or is it just easier not to see? And still, the buildings tower above you. But now you see the cracks, the weather stains, the broken friezes. What looked like perfection from afar is fractured up close. Rome teaches you that even gods can crumble, that stone does not equal strength, that beauty can blind you if you stare too long. You pass a bakery, and for a moment you feel warmth, not from the bread, from the memory of something small, something kind, a child helping an elder, a husband giving his wife the last olive. That's the Rome they don't show on coins, the Rome without gold, the Rome built on hands, not legends. And maybe, just maybe, that's the part worth dreaming about. You reach the edge of a forum, where voices rise and echo between ancient walls. A senator argues over land. A street poet recites lines about gods who never answer. Two children chase a pigeon, laughing, barefoot on hot stones. You stand there, trying to take it all in. The grandeur, the grit, the chaos wrapped in ritual. It's beautiful, but it's exhausting. The Forum isn't a museum, it's alive, loud, sweaty, breathing. You try to understand the language. Latin flows like a river, sharp and rhythmic. You catch words, imperium, gloria, virtus, but they're like ghosts. They pass through you. Rome doesn't slow down to explain itself. You have to keep up, or be forgotten. You step aside for a group of soldiers marching past. Their armor clinks, sun glaring off polished shields. They don't look heroic. They look tired, hardened, like men who've seen too much and expect more of the same. You wonder how many of them will still be alive next year or next week. Rome demands from everyone, from generals and bakers, from slaves and senators. No one lives untouched. You spot a temple ahead, its steps worn smooth, its roof shadowing marble gods with chipped noses and faded names. A woman kneels praying. Her voice is barely a whisper, but her desperation fills the space. She doesn't pray for glory, or war, or vengeance. She prays for rain, for bread, for her son to come home from the provinces. And the marble gods say nothing. They never do. They just watch. Watch as the strong rise and fall, as power shifts like sand under columns, as hope flickers, quiet and ordinary. Rome teaches you something strange. It is both overwhelming and intimate, brutal and delicate. Its monuments shout, but its people whisper. And it's in those whispers, the prayers, the jokes, the tired songs hummed in alleyways, that the true city lives. You walk a little further, and Rome starts to quiet. Not because it rests, but because the sun begins to fall. Shadows grow longer, the gold turns to amber, the marble softens in the dusk. You hear fewer voices now. The vendors are packing up. The temple bells echo softly. A child cries in the distance, not from fear, just hunger. Rome doesn't stop, but it slows briefly. And in that pause, you see it differently, not as a city of power or glory or conquest, but as a place where people simply live. Tired, hopeful, flawed, real. You pass a woman lighting a small lamp outside her home. The flame flickers against the wall, making shadows dance like spirits. She doesn't look at you. She's done this 1,000 nights before. You pass a man sewing his sandal by candlelight, a girl brushing dust off a clay bowl, and you begin to understand. Rome is not just what was built, it is what was endured. The marble may crack, but hands kept lifting, bread kept baking, songs kept humming in dark corners. This empire was never truly eternal, but the people in it were. Eternal in their struggle, their resilience, their quiet defiance. They didn't dream of Rome, they survived it. And maybe, just maybe, that is the greater legacy. So now, as night settles and stars blink into view, you stand still, dusty, awakened. You no longer dream of Rome the way you once did. You don't need to. You've seen it. You've walked its noise, its silence, its contradictions. And as your eyes grow heavier, you realize Rome doesn't ask you to love it. It only asks you to remember, even if only in sleep. You think a Roman bathhouse was like a modern spa? Think again. There's no eucalyptus steam or calming music here. Instead, there's heat, noise, and the shuffle of too many feet on cracked stone floors. You walk in, not to relax, but to survive the experience. The air smells of sweat, smoke, and sour oils. It's hot, oppressively hot. The kind of heat that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. You're already sweating before you undress. And you're not alone. This isn't private. Far from it. Dozens, maybe hundreds of other men fill the space, talking loudly, arguing politics, scrubbing their backs with shared sponges. Yes, shared. One sponge, used again and again, dipped into the same murky water. You hesitate, but there's no other option. This is Rome, after all. Bathing is public business, and it's not optional. Miss a few days, and people talk. Is he sick? Is he hiding something? You strip down. Someone bumps into you. Another man eyes you suspiciously as you sit in the wrong spot. His spot. Seating here isn't random. It's a social map. Sit in the wrong tier of stone, and you're claiming status that isn't yours, and that's dangerous. Bathhouses aren't just for hygiene, they're for hierarchy and whispers. Here, senators whisper about rivals, slaves eavesdrop for their masters, guards keep silent watch, but they're always listening. You start to feel it, the tension beneath the steam. This is no spa. It's a social furnace, a boiling pot of class, gossip, sweat, and power. You try to breathe, slowly, deeply, but the air feels thick, like trying to inhale through warm, damp wool. A drop of water from the ceiling taps your shoulder. You flinch instinctively. The water isn't clean. It's condensation from the sweat and steam of too many bodies. You close your eyes, letting the sound surround you. Splashing, murmuring, coughing, the scrape of sandals on tile. The bathhouse hums like a hive, but there's a strange rhythm to it, a kind of music. Like the ancient city itself, it's chaotic, but not without order. You sit still, letting it all pass through you. Across the room, a group of old men debate philosophy, voices rising and falling like waves. Next to them, two young boys laugh while slapping water at each other. A slave quietly pours oil into a marble bowl. You notice the details, the way torchlight flickers on wet stone, the way steam curls like ghosts between columns. This place is more than just a bath. It's a mirror of Roman life. Loud, layered, always watching, but also oddly timeless. You begin to wonder, how many souls sat where you sit now? How many secrets floated in this very steam? What whispered dreams once rose from these waters? Rome doesn't just build monuments, it traps memories. Even here, in a room filled with sweat and strangers. You exhale, and for a moment, you don't feel like a visitor anymore. You feel part of something old, something larger, something eternal. You think it's just steam, just sweat. But listen closer. The bathhouse speaks, not with words, but with glances, with lowered voices, with the quiet movement of cloaks and sandals just behind the columns. In Rome, a bath was not only for bathing, it was a stage, a trap, a whispering forum where reputations were made and destroyed. You hear your name, or something that sounds like it. You turn. A man quickly looks away. Was it just a slip of the tongue, or something else? You remember what the merchant said in the forum. Be careful where you sit. Not all offenses in Rome come from swords. Sometimes they come from sitting in the wrong marble seat, one meant for a senator's cousin, or from overhearing the wrong joke about the emperor. Here, politics drips like the condensation on the walls, subtle, slow, always watching. That man over there, he's not just washing, he's listening. The two old men, they speak of the grain supply, but their eyes flicker like birds at the word Caesar. You feel your skin prickle, not from heat, but from instinct. The realization settles slowly, like dust in warm water. In Rome, even silence can be dangerous. You grip the edge of the stone bench, and for the first time, the bath doesn't feel relaxing. It feels like a game, a performance. You sit straighter, listen harder. Here, your future could be decided by what you say, or what you don't. Later, as you leave the bathhouse, your skin is clean, but your thoughts feel heavy. You look up. Marble columns rise into a gray Roman sky. The scent of oils lingers faintly on your arms, but so does the echo of whispers. Somewhere behind those walls, someone is still talking. Maybe about you, or maybe about the next emperor. Rome doesn't sleep, not truly. Even in moments of silence, power shifts like steam. You walk past a statue of Neptune, his trident pointing at nothing and everything. You pause. Was the bath refreshing? Perhaps, but more than that, it was revealing. You saw Rome not as a dream, but as it truly is, beautiful, brutal, whispering beneath the surface, a place where what you overhear may one day decide your fate. And tonight, in your dreams, you may find yourself back there, sitting on warm stone, listening not to the water, but to the secrets it carries. Imagine brushing your teeth with human urine. In ancient Rome, this wasn't a joke, it was policy. Collected in jars left on street corners, urine was a household staple for Romans. It was used to clean clothes, to whiten togas, to bleach linen, and yes, to freshen breath. Ammonia, they believed, was a purifier. So slaves would stomp garments in tubs of stale urine, their feet stained and burned. Clothes came out bright, faces didn't. And for those who could afford imported urine, from Spain, say, that was considered premium grade. Rome, the glorious empire, ran not only on marble and might, but on things most would flush away. Public urinals weren't hidden in alleys. They were celebrated, taxed, even praised. The Emperor Vespasian even imposed a urine tax. When his son questioned the policy, he held up a coin and said, "Money doesn't smell." But the streets did. So did the laundries. And so did the breath of someone who had just freshened up. In a city of 1 million people, where water was gold and soap was myth, Romans got creative. Hygiene wasn't about minty freshness, it was survival. And perhaps just a little illusion. Step into a Roman street. Not the postcard version. This one is loud, grimy, and alive. Vendors shout. Oxen pull carts through narrow alleys. Children chase dogs through puddles of gods know what. And everywhere, smell. The scent of spices and sweat, of cooked meat and open sewers, of humanity packed into stone walls. In this chaos, hygiene becomes an act of balance. You clean what you must and ignore what you can. Roman public toilets, latrinae, had no stalls, no privacy. You sit side by side with strangers, chatting or arguing while doing your business. A communal sponge soaked in vinegar or water replaces toilet paper. It's shared and, yes, reused. For many, the sponge isn't the worst part. It's who sat before you and what they left behind. But Romans didn't complain. Not because they liked it, but because it was normal. To them, the body wasn't shameful. Cleanliness wasn't scented soap. It was ritual, repetition, and acceptance. At home, a bowl of oil might replace water. You scrape your skin clean with a strigil, pulling sweat and dust away. Bathing happened not daily, but socially, once or twice a week, often in massive thermae, where the noise was constant and the silence suspicious. In a 1 million-strong city, silence was rare. So was solitude. You were never alone, not even when trying to feel clean. The Romans feared disease, but didn't always understand it. Germs were unknown, but bad smells, they were feared. Miasma, the invisible poison in the air, was blamed for illness. And in a city of 1 million, the air was rarely fresh. To mask it, people carried pomanders, small balls of herbs and wax. Wealthy homes burned incense. Public spaces were cleaned with vinegar. But this wasn't just about comfort, it was protection. The Cloaca Maxima, the city's great sewer, was an engineering marvel, yet it couldn't keep up. Streets overflowed. Waste from bathhouses, homes, and markets trickled through alleys. Rats thrived, so did fleas. Plagues came in waves. Antonine, Cyprian, Justinian. Some historians believe these pandemics killed a third of Rome. Still, the city persisted. Romans blamed the gods or fate. They didn't hide from sickness, they accepted it. Ritual washing in temples, offerings to Asclepius, god of healing, and prayers. So many prayers. But even prayers couldn't erase the stench. A Roman apartment block, Insula, could house dozens of families, with no running water, no toilets inside. Buckets were used, then emptied into the street below, from a window, onto the cobblestones, onto your head if unlucky. Some apartments were 9 stories high. Imagine living under the 8th floor. The higher you climbed, the cheaper the rent, and the worse the smell. Still, people adapted. They washed with olive oil, scraped themselves clean, burned rosemary near doorways, carried charms against plague, and hoped that today, just today, they wouldn't catch what the neighbor had, or worse, what the neighbor left behind. To be clean in Rome wasn't about sterilization. It was about ritual, about status, about scent. The idea of hygiene as we know it didn't exist, but the Romans had their own logic. A clean citizen was an honorable one, a dirty man, a suspect. Bathing in public wasn't shameful, it was civic. You entered the baths not just to wash, but to belong. Among mosaics, steam, and sweat, status melted. Rich and poor soaked together, senators and beggars shoulder to shoulder. For a moment, everyone was human. But outside, in the alleys of Subura, the reality returned. Mud, manure, dust choking the lungs. A boy running barefoot through sewage. A mother washing a baby with a cloth already dirty. And a vendor selling food beside a cesspit. Yet still, there was pride. Romans were proud of their aqueducts, of their paved roads, of their latrines with marble seats. And maybe that pride kept them going, even when clean was just a feeling, a ritual, a moment. Because deep down they believed Rome was order in a world of chaos, civilization in a sea of filth. And maybe, just maybe, that belief itself was what kept them clean. You think of gladiators, and you imagine power, fame, victory. But behind every roar of the crowd was a man trembling beneath the helmet, a slave, a prisoner, a soul who didn't ask to be here. The Coliseum was a stage for the empire's hunger, for blood, not honor. And the men on the sand, they weren't heroes, they were entertainment. You didn't fight to be a legend, you fought to stay alive. Maybe, just maybe, for one more day. They called them gladiators, from the Latin word gladius, meaning sword. But many never even touched one until the day of their first match. They were farmers, rebels, criminals, stripped of their names, given numbers, trained like beasts, fed like dogs, watched like animals in a cage. In the ludus, the training school, pain was constant. Wooden swords beat into flesh, bones cracked under the weight of iron. They bled so that Rome could cheer, and still some fought with fire, not for glory, but for a chance that the crowd might love them, that the emperor might lift his thumb upward, that they might, somehow, walk out of the arena alive. In the training grounds, they didn't just break your body. They tried to break your will. You'd wake before the sun, the sound of clashing wooden swords already echoing through the corridors. Some mornings, the air smelled of sweat and old blood. Other mornings, it was silent. Someone hadn't survived the night. The doctore, your trainer, didn't care about your past. He didn't care if you had a family or if you once believed in gods. He cared about one thing, making sure you could kill and survive, or at least die well. You weren't alone, though. In pain, you found brothers, another rebel, another slave, another face whose name you might never know, but whose breath was ragged like yours. They fought beside you, fell beside you, laughed at night with you under oil lamps when no one was watching. You shared crusts of bread, bandages, hope, and fear, because you knew at some point you might be forced to face each other. In the arena, only one would walk out. And still, you trained together, harder than ever, not for friendship, but because iron sharpens iron, and a dull blade dies first. Before each match, you'd feel it, that knot in your stomach, the nausea, the urge to run. But where? The guards were everywhere, the crowd already roaring, your name or number being announced. You weren't a man anymore, you were a symbol, and symbols don't get to be afraid. But deep inside, behind the mask, every gladiator was terrified, not just of dying, but of being forgotten, to bleed for nothing, to die for cheers that faded before your body hit the sand. The gates creak open. Your feet step into sand that feels warmer than fire. The arena is brighter than you imagined. The sun isn't just overhead, it's everywhere. Every breath is dry. You can't blink fast enough to stop your eyes from watering. But you march forward. You have to. Behind you, the gate closes, and the crowd erupts. Thousands, tens of thousands. They chant, some your name, others the name of the man across from you, your opponent. He looks like a monster, or maybe you do. It's hard to say when you're both dressed like death. Helmets with narrow slits, shields as large as doors, swords or tridents glinting like they thirst for blood. He takes the first step. You match it. Sand crunches under your feet. You circle, not just him, but the space. You calculate. The sun is behind you. Good. That gives you the light advantage. But he's taller. He can strike over your shield. Bad. The editor, the man who hosts the game, lifts a hand. The trumpets blare, and the fight begins. You lunge, he parries. You twist, he strikes. Each moment is breathless. Every move could be your last. There's no glory in this, only grit and luck. 1,000 eyes watch you, but none can save you. Blood sprays, you don't know whose. The crowd roars louder. You hear metal on bone. Yours? His? It doesn't matter. You stay standing. You will not fall. Not yet. Then something shifts. His foot slips. You see the moment. You take it. Strike, push, cut, and he collapses. The crowd rises. You can't hear them anymore. Just your breath, the blood in your ears, the pounding of your heart. You wait. The editor stands, raises his hand. Will he spare your opponent or command his death? Your fate is tangled in his fingers, your soul held hostage by a gesture. You survived, for now. The crowd screams for a verdict. Thumbs turn, some down, others up. The editor looks at the Emperor's box, then back at you. A moment of breathless pause. Then he spares your opponent. The man you just defeated lives, barely. He'll fight again, bleed again, maybe win, maybe die. And you're led out of the arena, not like a victor, but like a tool that still works. The corridor is cold, your body burns, your knees tremble, but your mind, it begins to unravel. Was that glory, or was that just survival dressed in gold? Back in the training barracks, no one cheers. The other gladiators nod, not with joy, but with understanding. They've all been there, some limping, some scarred, some quiet, because they've lost too many brothers. They don't dream of crowns, they dream of sleep, of walking free, of no longer hearing the roar of a crowd that forgets your name the moment the next man enters the ring. That night, you sit with a bowl of stale bread and thin broth. Your hand shakes. You can still feel the sword's weight, hear the scream, see the blood. Glory? No. There is no glory in killing for applause. There is only pain you can't explain, and silence. You lie on your cot, stare at the cracked ceiling. You remember a face, maybe your opponent's, maybe your own. You wonder if there's another life where you don't have to fight, where you're not a weapon, where your name means something more than a cheer. But until that day comes, you sleep with one eye open, because here in Rome, even heroes bleed, and gladiators, no matter how skilled, are never more than entertainment, beautiful, brutal, and forgotten. You are invited to a Roman feast. The oil lamps are lit. Musicians pluck slow, hypnotic melodies from curved lyres. You recline on a marble bench wrapped in dyed silk, sandals untied. Golden plates are placed before you, glistening with figs, dormouse stuffed with pine nuts, and crimson wine so thick it clings to the cup like blood. But don't get too comfortable. Roman banquets were not simply for pleasure. They were theater, politics, danger. This isn't a meal, it's a game, a test, a trap. Guests eat until they can't breathe. Then they excuse themselves to vomit and return to eat again. It's called vomitorium, a misunderstood term, but the behavior was real. And the more decadent the table, the more dangerous it became. Food was power, to impress, to intimidate, to eliminate. In this world, status meant serving flamingo tongues or sow's udders braised in honey. There were oysters from the ends of the empire and peacock brains garnished with gold leaf. Yet beneath the rich flavors lingered another taste: fear. You never knew if your wine had been spiced with imported saffron or something far deadlier. Historians still debate how many emperors were assassinated during dinner. Claudius choked on a dish laced with mushrooms. Augustus refused grapes offered by his own daughter. Caligula? He poisoned others just to see them squirm. Trust was as fragile as the glass goblets they drank from. Every smile could be a lie. Every course could be your last. So, as you lift your cup tonight in ancient Rome, remember, what glitters may not be gold, and what tastes sweet may kill. The Roman feast was not just a place to eat. It was where alliances were born and betrayed. Imagine reclining beside a senator who voted against your father's promotion, or across from a general whose ambition whispers louder than his loyalty. Every sip of wine was a negotiation, every laugh a calculation. The hosts weren't just feeding you, they were watching, gauging your reactions. Who eats the lark's tongue first? Who hesitates at the stuffed eel? Who drinks and who doesn't? These moments decided fates. For in the Empire of Rome, poison was not merely a substance, it was a language, a rumor, a shadow. Poison could take days to work. It could mimic a fever, a cough, even sadness. So subtle that the healer might not suspect, or worse, might be the one who administered it. Banquets became a stage of masks. Guests praised the wine, though they feared what floated beneath. They toasted the host, even if their stomach turned. Because in Rome, dying with dignity was sometimes the only control you had left. The poet Martial once wrote of a man who clinked glasses with his killer and smiled as he sipped, not because he wanted to die, but because he refused to let fear poison his final moment. You see, to survive a Roman banquet was not just about appetite. It was about reading people, knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, when to drink, and when to spill. And sometimes survival meant nothing at all, because the most dangerous dish wasn't on the plate. It was the silence between courses. Some banquets were not remembered for their flavors, but for who never left the table. Beneath the golden goblets and silver platters, there was a quiet paranoia that soaked into the marble floors. You might hear laughter, but if you listened closely, you'd hear the unspoken questions. Why did she refuse the honeyed wine? Why did he only pretend to eat? And where is the host's heir tonight? Guests exchanged glances sharper than daggers, because power in Rome was never passed politely. It was taken in silence, in shadows, and often over supper. The most ambitious senators were rarely poisoned by their enemies. No, those poisons came from friends, from wives, from brothers. Because in Rome, betrayal wasn't rare, it was expected. To survive in such a world, you didn't need a sword, you needed a mask. And in these feasts, everyone wore one. The man laughing beside you, he once toasted the same emperor and buried him 2 nights later. The woman pouring your drink, she knows which amphora hides the truth. And the servant waiting quietly in the corner, he sees more than any consul ever will. Poison in Rome was not just a weapon, it was a culture, a craft. And in a city where nothing was sacred, not the gods, not the Senate, not even the family table, trust died long before anyone else did. They say a feast reveals who you truly are, but in ancient Rome, it only revealed who lived long enough to finish dessert. In the flickering candlelight of a Roman banquet, shadows danced more honestly than the guests. Every smile masked a scheme, every toast concealed a risk, and every bite could be the last. But that was Rome. To be Roman was to balance on a blade, elegant, poised, and never blinking. The marble columns, the silk togas, the honeyed figs, they were not just luxuries, they were illusions, beautiful distractions from a truth no one dared say aloud, that even in the heart of civilization, survival came before civility. And so you sat quietly, you chewed slowly, you studied your neighbor's eyes more than your food. You laughed at jokes you didn't understand because silence might raise suspicion. And when the feast ended, if you were lucky, you still had breath in your lungs and no metal in your cup. Yet it wasn't all cruelty. It was art, it was theater, it was politics performed with wine and whispers. Some of the greatest thinkers, writers, and leaders the world has ever known passed through these halls. Cicero's wit, Seneca's warnings, Marcus Aurelius's calm, all echoed in rooms where danger shared the same table as genius. In Rome, the feast was life, and life was the feast. Messy, risky, decadent, but always unforgettable. You don't just remember the poison, you remember the music, the sparkle of bronze light on amphorae, the warmth of roasted chestnuts, the hush before betrayal. And perhaps that is Rome's final gift, not how long it lasted, but how deeply it lingers. You sit down in the stone amphitheater, expecting a play, maybe a tragic tale, maybe a light-hearted farce. The stone beneath you is warm from the sun, and all around Rome gathers to be entertained. The crowd laughs, cheers, and gossips. But you feel something else, tension. Because this isn't just theater, this is something darker. A slave is led onto the stage, dressed in the costume of a mythological hero. His hands tremble, but his face is painted brave. The crowd hushes as a lion is released. This isn't an act. This is death, choreographed. In Rome, some dramas required real blood. Convicted criminals were forced to play out scenes of violent deaths, not with props, but with real weapons, real beasts, and real endings. The line between art and punishment blurred until they were the same. You think you're watching a play, but the actors know they will not bow at the end. The playwrights wrote with ink, but the executioners delivered the punctuation. In the grand theaters of Rome, myths were retold not just with words, but with screams. You might witness a reenactment of Prometheus being chained, not with leather straps, but with iron cuffs. Or see a man burned alive to represent Hercules' funeral pyre. This was entertainment wrapped in execution. Some condemned were dressed as villains, monsters, traitors, dehumanized so the crowd could cheer more freely. There were scripts, but the endings were not fictional. Roman audiences didn't come just to feel. They came to judge, to revel, to indulge the darkest parts of themselves. And the worst part? The victims knew. They walked onto that stage knowing the applause was for their suffering. For some, death was faster than shame. For others, shame lingered longer than pain. Art in Rome was not always beauty. Sometimes it was cruelty made poetic. From the upper seats, the view seems theatrical. Robes swirl, swords clash, painted backdrops shimmer in candlelight. But then something changes. A scream that is not rehearsed. A spurt of blood that stains not just the tunic, but the front row. You watch as the crowd leans forward, hungry, gleeful. They are not watching tragedy. They are savoring reality. And in that moment, the stage becomes a mirror. You wonder, what role do you play in this? Would you cheer? Would you flinch? Or would you tell yourself it's just art, even as you smell iron in the air? The victims on stage were no longer men in the audience's eyes. They were metaphors, sacrifices, stories with bones. Rome had built a civilization where cruelty wore a mask called culture, and sometimes that mask slipped. Long after the final cry, after the last body is dragged away, the silence settles. You walk home through marble streets, but your mind stays in that theater. The images don't fade, they haunt. You wonder what kind of people clap for death. And then you wonder what kind of world created the need to clap at all. Rome built great aqueducts, wrote laws, conquered lands, but it also turned suffering into a spectacle. You see, the true performance wasn't on the stage, it was in the audience. Their laughter, their cheers, their stillness when a man begged for mercy. You realize this was not just about Rome, it was about us, about how easy it is to hide cruelty in culture, to confuse justice with punishment, to silence compassion with applause. And as you close your eyes that night, the roar of the crowd echoes in your memory, not as entertainment, but as a warning. You are not Caesar, not a senator, not even a soldier. You are just someone, a body in a crowd of a million. You wake before sunrise, not because of discipline, but necessity. The air smells of ash and sewage. The street beneath your feet is cracked, sticky from spilled wine and waste. You line up for water, carrying clay jars that dig into your shoulders. Your name doesn't matter here. You're a tenant in a room the size of a closet, stacked above dozens more, in an insula that might collapse in the next storm. You eat what you can buy or steal, a chunk of bread, a bruised fig, maybe a fish too old to smell right. And all the while orders shout around you, orders from guards, from landlords, from fate. You look for dignity in small things, a clean cloth, a moment of shade, a copper coin saved. But Rome doesn't offer rest. Every street is a negotiation, every face a warning. You hope for rain, not just to drink, but to wash the filth from the stones. You wonder, not if today will be hard, but if it will end. If someone, somewhere, will remember you once you are gone. But the city is too loud to notice a single silence. You think freedom is a birthright, but in Rome, birth determines chains. Women are taught silence, children obedience, slaves invisibility. If you're a woman, you eat last, speak softly, and step aside. If you're a child, your fate may be a coin flip, sold to another household, beaten for amusement, forgotten by the next market day. And if you're a slave, one wrong answer could mean lashings. A broken dish might cost your life. You belong to someone. Your pain is their property. You look up at the statues of emperors and wonder what it's like to matter. But the marble doesn't answer, it only watches. Even hope is rationed here. A day without punishment is a gift, a kind word, a treasure. In the bathhouse, you keep your eyes down. On the street, you walk behind. At work, you speak only when spoken to. And always, always, you remember your place. Because to forget it, even for a second, could mean the end. Rome has no memory for nobodies, but you remember. Every bruise, every slight, every time your voice was swallowed. It makes you quieter, but not less aware. Someday, you tell yourself, someday, maybe someone will hear. Some days blur into each other. The same streets, the same aches, the same silence. But today is market day, not for you to buy, but to carry. You shoulder sacks for vendors who won't meet your eyes. The cobblestones bite your feet. You hear laughter, but it's never for you. Just beyond the square, someone is being beaten. You do not turn. Looking could mean involvement. Involvement could mean punishment. You keep your head down. Rome teaches this well. The art of invisibility. You see the temples, the fountains, the grandeur, but you belong to none of it. You are background, necessary but unnoticed. When it rains, you find shelter under cracked awnings. When it's cold, you huddle near the bakery's exhaust. And when it's night, you listen for rats. You never sleep deeply. Safety is a luxury. You've seen too many vanish. One wrong word, one angry soldier, one accusation. That's all it takes. So you move quietly, live small, and hope, foolishly, that tomorrow might be gentler. You dream of being remembered, not for greatness, but simply for having been. A name spoken aloud, a face recalled. But Rome only remembers the loud, the powerful, the ruthless. Not those who wait in lines, not the hands that scrub floors or tend to strangers. You wonder, do the stones remember your footsteps? Does the wind carry your sighs? You have no statues, no scrolls, no song. But you lived, you mattered to someone, a friend, a child, a neighbor. Rome marches on, but somewhere in the layers of its stones, your breath once lingered. Every empire has its Caesars and its shadows. This city taught you both pain and beauty. You walked through life unseen, but not unloved. And still, you endure. And that, perhaps, is a legacy of its own. In the Roman Empire, law was not a shield for the weak, it was a weapon for the powerful. Justice, in theory, was carved into marble tablets and spoken in solemn forums, but in practice, it bent with the winds of ambition. The emperor could frown, and suddenly a man could vanish. A whispered dream of Caesar's death? Treason. A juke at a feast? Insult to power. Wearing the wrong shade of red? A challenge to imperial dignity. All punishable by death. The law was not a constant, it was a mirror to fear. You learned not what was right, but what was safe. And even that changed. One day a word was acceptable, the next it brought chains. Rome was a stage where survival depended not on innocence, but performance and silence. Always silence. Justice in Rome had its own theater. The courtroom, yes, but also the gossip-laced streets, the markets echoing with accusations, and the whispered warnings in bathhouses. You didn't need to be guilty. You only needed someone more powerful to decide you were. Trials could be swift or eternal. Some waited years in dark cells, their names forgotten even by their accusers. Bribes helped, but not always. Connections helped, but only if your patron was still in favor. And even then, a misstep could cost them their life too. You watched as men bowed lower with each promotion, as judges weighed favors heavier than facts. There was no scale of justice, only the balance of fear and ambition. And if you found yourself caught in that balance, you prayed not for justice, but mercy. Imagine living in a world where your very thoughts could betray you. Rome wasn't just a place of marble and glory. It was a surveillance state wrapped in togas. Neighbors became informants. Slaves were tortured for confessions. A whisper in your sleep, a scribble in your diary, a grimace at the wrong joke, all could be construed as rebellion. The Praetorian Guard listened as much as they watched. Senators gave speeches with one eye on the crowd, the other on the emperor's face. Censors read poetry for subversion. The wrong metaphor might end in exile or execution. Even silence could be damning if spoken at the wrong time. So Romans learned to act, to nod when expected, to laugh at dangerous jokes, to praise emperors in poems and prayers. They did not lie, they survived. In such a world, truth was not a virtue, it was a liability, and performance was everything. And so, under the grand arches of Roman law, a silent fear bloomed, not always spoken, but always present. From the humblest baker to the richest senator, no one stood entirely safe. The emperor's word was law, but his silence could be deadlier. People learned to read the absence of expression more than its presence. A missed smile, a frown too long, a glance not returned. These were the new decrees, unwritten, but obeyed more strictly than any scroll. In this world, law was theater, and everyone was both actor and audience. You clapped at executions, you whispered loyalty, you toasted to emperors while wondering who would fall next. The courtroom was not a place of clarity, but of trembling uncertainty. And for the nameless masses, justice was not something to expect, but something to survive. The true punishment was not death. It was a life spent pretending not to think, not to fear, not to hope. But they did hope, quietly, in their hearts, that one day, perhaps, the law would be just, not feared. Rome did not collapse with a scream. It faded with a whisper. No marching enemies breaching the gates, no final battle to carve into legend. Instead, it was a slow rot, spreading through marble and blood alike. The streets, once filled with parades and poets, became alleyways for shadows and smoke. The fires that broke out weren't always started by invaders. They often began within. Some say Nero watched as flames consumed the city, playing the lyre as screams rose to the night. Others say he set them himself to clear space for new palaces. But whether fire or famine, riot or rot, the empire bled from the inside out. The legions, once symbols of Roman strength, had become ghosts of themselves. Some deserted, some sold their swords to the highest bidder. Loyalty was no longer to Rome, but to gold. And so, the city that once ruled the world found itself unable to protect even its own temples. Statues were pulled down, not by enemies, but by starving citizens who burned them for warmth. Priests, once praised for divine wisdom, were now blamed for divine silence. And across the empire, in places once conquered in glory, people whispered, "Is this the end?" Rome's fall wasn't a moment, it was a mood. A creeping doubt in the hearts of those who had once believed their empire eternal. A mother, walking her child past a crumbling arch, would pause, not out of awe, but from fear it might fall. A senator would clutch his robes tighter, not in pride, but to feel something still grand. The city was still here, yes, but it no longer felt like Rome. Not the Rome they had sung about, not the Rome they had died for. And in this silence, louder than 1,000 battles, came the quiet truth. An empire can die without anyone noticing. By the time Rome's enemies arrived, there was little left to conquer. The real battle had already been lost inside the hearts of its people. Fires no longer just burned the temples, they burned trust. The Senate, once the proud voice of Rome, now whispered behind closed doors, powerless beneath the shadow of emperors and their whims. Laws changed with a nod. Justice was something purchased or feared, and whispers of revolt traveled faster than messengers. In the slums, where 10,000 lived in buildings stacked like clay towers, a single spark meant devastation. The poor slept beside their goats, their walls made of wood and their floors of filth. If the fire didn't get you, the sickness might. Rome was no longer a dream. It was a gamble, for bread, for mercy, for survival. Even the statues seemed tired. Their marble eyes no longer watched with glory, but with sorrow. Every chipped column told a story of wars long past, of hope that had cracked. And among the ruins, the silence was filled not with prayers, but with bargaining. Pleas to gods, to rulers, to fate itself. Just one more day, one more meal, one more mercy. This was Rome now, not golden, but gray. When Rome burned, not all flames were visible. Some fires lit behind the eyes of fear, of betrayal, of a society unraveling. Nero's court was a theater of masks, and every guest played a role. The loyal senator, the loyal general, the loyal son. But loyalty meant little in a room where trust had drowned in wine. Poison was easier than open war, and smiles could hide daggers better than any sheath. You could sit beside a man at dinner, laugh with him, toast the empire, and watch him fall into silence before dessert. These weren't assassinations, they were customs. The poor feared fire, the rich feared whispers. Walls had ears, and every servant might serve two masters. A joke misunderstood could become your death sentence. Dreams were dangerous too. One man dreamed Caesar died, and died himself by morning. Another wore a robe too red, and the emperor saw rebellion. Rome was drowning in symbols it could no longer read. Still, the streets bustled. Bakers sold burnt loaves. Children played in ruins. Life went on, not in strength, but in stubbornness. Rome had become a ghost town, pretending it was still alive. Citizens clung to rituals as if repetition could restore greatness. Senators held speeches no one believed. Gladiators fought in games no one cheered. And through it all, the smoke never cleared. Rome was not only burning, it was forgetting what it meant to be Rome. Rome's final tragedy wasn't its fall, but how ordinary it felt. There was no curtain call, no great farewell. Just another day where the baker opened late, the aqueduct leaked again, and someone, somewhere, vanished without anyone noticing. The empire didn't fall like a hero in battle. It faded like a story everyone stopped telling. And yet, the bones of Rome still stood. Columns cracked, statues worn by wind and rain, temples without gods, streets without processions. Rome became a skeleton wearing a crown, haunting itself. The whispers grew louder than laws. Superstition replaced doctrine. Rumors had more power than truth. They said Nero sang as Rome burned, but perhaps he sang because he knew it could not be saved. He wasn't a tyrant who broke the city. He was simply its echo, a reflection of an empire that had forgotten why it existed. Rome didn't fall by betrayal. It fell by apathy, by forgetting the meaning of strength, by confusing spectacle with substance, power with wisdom, control with care. In homes across the empire, families clung to faded frescoes and cracked floor mosaics, trying to remember what their ancestors once believed in. They prayed to gods who no longer answered. They looked to leaders who no longer led. They taught children stories that no longer inspired. And somewhere between memory and myth, the real Rome disappeared. It didn't die in fire. It died in forgetfulness, in the silence of no one caring enough to fight for it, in the decay of meaning behind marble. And in this silence, something universal emerged. Every empire ends, not with conquest, but when its people stop believing in it. That was Rome's final lesson, one not carved in stone, but whispered in ruins. You don't have to live in Rome to understand its weight, because Rome never really left. It sank deep into the bones of Western civilization, into our architecture, our politics, even our dreams. You see it in marble buildings and mirrored power structures, in languages that echo Latin, in laws that still reflect its order. But more than that, you carry Rome in your mind. You carry its ambition when you strive to be more, its pride when you look in the mirror and feel invincible. Its fear, too, when the walls feel like they might crack. Rome whispers in our victories, it screams in our downfalls, and sometimes it cries in our silence. Because Rome isn't a place, it's a mindset, a myth that shaped empires long after its stones fell. Do you feel the need to be remembered? That's Roman. Do you hide your weakness behind grand gestures? That's Roman too. Do you worry about legacy more than happiness? Then yes, you understand the empire within. Rome gave the world more than roads and ruins. It gave a blueprint for power and its price, a warning etched in time, waiting for us to listen. The empire within you is not made of stone, but of choices. You rule it not with a sword, but with your habits. And just like Rome, it can rise or collapse based on what you feed it. Ambition can build your roads, but ego might burn your temples. Discipline guards your borders, but anger can open the gates. Every morning you wear your crown. The decisions you make, the values you uphold, the way you treat others when no one is watching. In this private Rome of yours, every action is a decree. Every indulgence a tax, every silence a verdict. And just like the emperors before you, you too are tempted by excess, by pride, by fear disguised as control. But here's the truth Rome never taught. The greatest empire is the one that doesn't need to conquer. The strongest ruler is the one who rules himself. The roads that matter most are the ones inside, the paths of patience, of empathy, of courage. Your empire lives or dies by how you govern yourself. And that kind of power doesn't fade with time. Rome left behind an empire, yes, but it also left behind a mirror, one that reflects not just grandeur, but also warning, not just conquest, but consequence. When you look at history, you're not just looking back, you're looking in. That urge to dominate, to outshine, to control others, it's not just history, it's habit. We see empires rise in boardrooms, in social media, even in families. Every time ego trumps empathy, every time might outweighs meaning, the old Rome breathes again. But we also carry the other side, the builders, the dreamers, the philosophers. Marcus Aurelius wrote not to conquer others, but to conquer his own mind. That's where the real empire lives, not in territory, but in thought. What ruins us isn't the fall of cities, it's the collapse of inner integrity. When we abandon reflection, when we forget humility, we start becoming what we once feared, rulers who have everything except peace. So look inward. Ask yourself, what empire are you building? Is it one of fear or freedom? Rome isn't gone. It lives every time you choose silence over cruelty. It echoes in restraint, in reflection, in those rare moments when power could have shouted but chose to listen instead. You don't need to build marble temples to be remembered. You don't need to wear a crown to be noble. And you don't need to conquer the world to leave something behind. Because your smallest actions, when rooted in wisdom and kindness, ripple farther than any empire ever did. We often think legacy is carved in stone. But the truest legacies are carved in moments, quiet, courageous, human. A father holding back anger, a leader admitting fault, a stranger choosing compassion. That's how civilizations are truly shaped, not by fire or blood, but by choices that echo gently across time. Rome gave us stories of glory, yes, but it also gave us cautionary tales. And in a world that still chases empires, on screens, in politics, even in our own ambitions, maybe the wisest thing we can do is pause. Pause and ask, is this the empire I want to leave behind? Is this the history I want to repeat? And if the answer is no, then let Rome end with you, not as a ruin, but as a rebirth. You don't need to time travel to the Roman Empire. You're already lucky you weren't born there. No need to dodge falling chamber pots or guess which wine was poisoned. No need to pretend loyalty or laugh at the emperor's joke just to survive another day. You survived simply by not being born there. And yet, Rome never truly left us. Its whispers echo in our politics. Its hunger for power still lives in boardrooms and news cycles. The marble may have cracked, but the mindsets endure. If this journey spoke to something deep inside you, if you felt something stir between the shadows and the stars, subscribe for more stories that help you sleep and help you see. Because sometimes, to rest, we must remember how hard it was to survive. Welcome to a new kind of history, gentle, honest, and unforgettable.